Imagine a military force, stewarded by a nation's need for security and stability, gradually morphing into a radical entity with deep religious inclinations. The Pakistan Army, a pivotal player on the global stage, has undergone a profound ideological shift over the decades. This transformation has not only altered its operational doctrines, but has also deeply impacted the socio-political landscape of Pakistan and its international relationships. This video delves into the intricate journey of the Pakistan Army's radicalization and Islamization, tracing back to its historical roots and exploring its profound impacts on the region. Through a meticulous analysis, we unravel how a military institution evolved into a politically charged and religiously motivated entity, influencing global geopolitics and regional stability. The foundation of the Pakistan Army's radicalization can be traced back to the British colonial era. The British recruitment policies heavily favored Muslims for their perceived martial qualities, setting an early precedent for religious associations within the military ranks. This was further compounded post-1857, as the British sought to divide and rule by promoting Hindu-Muslim antagonisms, which echoed in the military lines. Sir Syed Ahmed Khan, a prominent Muslim educationalist and reformer, significantly influenced the ideological leaning of Muslim soldiers. His writings and teachings infused a sense of religious pride and separateness that later found its home in the military ethos of Pakistan. These historical seeds of Islamization were unwittingly sown by colonial strategies and native reactions to them, which later blossomed into full-fledged radicalization. The partition of India, which led to the birth of Pakistan, was inherently tied to religious identities. The army, from its inception, was not just a protector of territorial boundaries, but also a guardian of a religiously defined national identity. The Pakistan Army's foundation was deeply influenced by the religious and ethnic diversity of the new nation. Initially formed from the divisions of the British Indian Army, the army was an amalgamation of various ethnic groups, each bearing distinct religious identities. These early formations were steeped in religious overtones, which were pivotal in defining the army's ethos and operational philosophy. Religion quickly became a rallying point in the newly formed military. Despite the overarching narrative that the army fought for religious causes, a deeper investigation reveals that the underlying motivations were largely political and related to power. Leaders used religious rhetoric as a means to consolidate power, ensuring loyalty among the ranks by aligning with deeply held beliefs. During its formative years, the Pakistan Army was tasked with not only defending the geographical borders, but also safeguarding the ideological frontiers of the Islamic Republic. This dual responsibility paved the way for a military that was unusually sensitive to religious matters, setting the stage for future radicalization. Long before General Zia-ul-Haq's explicit policies of Islamization, signs of religious radicalization were evident during the regime of Ayub Khan. Operations like Gibraltar and Grand Salute were not just military strategies, but were also imbued with Islamic fervor, aiming to liberate Kashmir and integrate it into Pakistan as a Muslim region. These operations were reflections of an army that was beginning to see itself as a crusader of Islam. This period also saw the emergence of two distinct types of generals within the army ranks: those who were westernized and liberal, often referred to as whiskey generals, and those who were conservative and religiously inclined. This dichotomy within the leadership further complicated the army's identity, creating factions and internal divisions based on religious beliefs. It was during these early years that the seeds of radicalization, sown during the army's formation, began to germinate. The mixing of religious fervor with military operations set a dangerous precedent that would escalate in the coming decades. Bhutto's era marked a critical juncture in the radicalization of the Pakistan Army. In an effort to appease religious groups and consolidate his power, Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto introduced several policies that nudged the army further down the path of Islamization. Among these were restrictions on alcohol and the mandatory observance of Islamic prayers by army personnel. Changes also included alterations in the dress code and military ceremonies, incorporating Islamic rituals. These changes were not just symbolic. They were instrumental in dismantling the secular traditions of the army, embedding religious practices into the core of military life. This shift had profound implications, eroding the professional and secular ethos of the army, and replacing it with a religiously motivated identity. This transformation under Bhutto set the stage for the more overt and far-reaching Islamization that would occur under his successor, General Zia-ul-Haq, marking a pivotal moment when the army's professional identity began to be overtly intertwined with religious ideologies. General Zia-ul-Haq's regime is often regarded as the epic of the Pakistan Army's radical transformation. A devout Muslim, Zia embarked on a comprehensive program to Islamize the army, believing it to be essential for the country's integrity and Islamic identity. Under his rule, Islamic teachings and practices were deeply embedded into the army's training and daily routines. The impact of Zia's policies was profound and far-reaching. He encouraged the concept of jihad, particularly against the Soviet forces in Afghanistan, and supported mujahideen groups, which not only altered the army's strategic focus but also its ideological stance. This period redefined the Pakistan Army not just as a national defense force, but as a crusader of Islam, involved in what was perceived as a holy war. This transformation had significant implications for the internal cohesion of the army, fostering a generation of officers and soldiers who viewed their military role through the lens of religious duty, profoundly altering the army's operational philosophy and its role in national and international politics. Following Zia-ul-Haq's death, the radical ideologies he instilled did not dissipate, but instead continued to influence the army's operations and doctrines. The 1990s and early 2000s saw leaders like Fazal Rehman, often referred to derogatorily as Diesel due to his political maneuverings, further pushing the agenda of Islamization within the army ranks. These leaders leveraged their religious influence to garner support from the army, aligning military operations with religious motivations, especially in regions like Kashmir. Under these influences, the Pakistan Army continued to support various militant groups, perceiving them as strategic assets in its geopolitical endeavors, particularly against India. This period solidified the army's reputation as an institution where radical ideologies were not just tolerated, but were part of the strategic fabric. The continuation of these radical policies created an environment where religious extremism could thrive within the military ranks, further blurring the lines between state and non-state actors, complicating Pakistan's internal security and its international relations. A critical aspect of the Pakistan Army's radicalization was the misinterpretation and selective use of Islamic texts. Leaders within the army often used religious doctrines to justify military actions against perceived enemies, particularly India. This misinterpretation was not merely a misunderstanding but a deliberate manipulation of religious texts to meet political and military objectives. This approach led to a doctrine of total war, where the army saw its actions as part of a divine plan. This not only justified excessive use of force, but also dehumanized the enemy, leading to increased violence and conflict. The implications were severe, as it fostered a culture within the army that viewed all conflicts through a religious lens, often ignoring more pragmatic and peaceful approaches. The misinterpretation of Islamic doctrines essentially transformed the army into what can be described as a zealot force, where religious fervor overshadowed strategic reasoning and ethical considerations. The Kashmir conflict has been a significant factor in the radicalization of the Pakistan Army. The dispute over Kashmir has not only been about territorial claims, but has also been framed as a religious conflict, with the army portraying it as a jihad against Hindu India. This narrative has been a potent tool in justifying the army's support for militant groups in the region. The radicalization was further fueled by overestimations of military capabilities, as seen during operations like Kargil. The belief in divine support and religious righteousness led to strategic miscalculations, underestimating the challenges and overestimating the army's capabilities. This not only led to military setbacks, but also international isolation and criticism. Kashmir remains a flashpoint in the army's radical agenda, with ongoing implications for regional stability and international relations. The conflict is entangled with the army's radical ideologies, making it a persistent source of tension and violence. One of the most disturbing outcomes of the army's radicalization has been its link to internal conflicts and acts of terrorism. There have been numerous instances where elements within the army have been found collaborating with terrorist organizations, both within and outside Pakistan. These collaborations have ranged from logistical support to active participation in terrorist acts, such as the 2008 Mumbai attacks and the assault on the Indian Parliament. The radicalization within the army ranks has not only compromised Pakistan's security, but has also led to a situation where the military is seen as both a protector and a perpetrator. This dual role has caused significant distress within the country and has been a major point of contention in Pakistan's international relations, especially with neighbors like India and Afghanistan. The involvement in terrorism has also led to internal divisions within the army, with factions split between radical ideologies and those advocating for a more professional and secular military approach. This division complicates the army's operational effectiveness and its role in national politics. The Kargil War between Pakistan and India in 1999 serves as a stark illustration of the consequences of military radicalization. The war was initiated by elements within the Pakistan army who believed that they could alter the status quo in Kashmir through military action. This decision was heavily influenced by the radicalized view that military engagement was a religious duty and victory was assured by divine support. The conflict resulted in significant military and civilian casualties and ended with Pakistan's strategic defeat. The Kargil War exposed the flaws in the radical military strategy, highlighting the gap between ideological zeal and military reality. It also strained Pakistan's relations with major powers and brought substantial international pressure on Pakistan to rein in its military adventurism. Despite the clear lessons from the Kargil debacle, the army's radical elements continued to wield significant influence, illustrating the deep-rooted nature of radicalization within the institution. The radicalization of the Pakistan army has had profound impacts on its relations with civilian governments. The army's powerful role in Pakistani politics, coupled with its radical ideologies, has often put it at odds with civilian leaders who are seen as less committed to Islamic principles. This has led to numerous instances of military coups and the army's interference in civilian governance. Civil-military relations in Pakistan have been characterized by a tussle for power, with the army often acting as a state within a state. The radical elements within the army have used their influence to shape government policies, especially concerning security and foreign affairs. This has undermined democratic institutions and stunted political development in the country. The tension between radical military leaders and civilian governments has also impacted Pakistan's international image and relations, particularly with Western countries that emphasize democratic governance and secularism. The radicalization of the Pakistan army has had far-reaching effects on the country's stability. The intertwining of military operations with religious ideologies has not only affected the army's effectiveness, but has also led to broader social and political issues.